All right, I think it's 7 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started. I'm Andrew Young. I'm the executive director of the Georgian Bay Land Trust, and the real privilege to be here tonight to, introduce Jenn LeMesurier, who is our land securement coordinator with the Land Trust. And in a moment, I'll do a bit more of a formal introduction of Jenn, but we're just really happy that everybody's decided to spend a Wednesday evening with us and learning a bit more about how some of our land acquisition programs work, and maybe at some point how you might want to get involved with that. And I think there's also some folks here who have participated in land donations and raising money for different land projects as well over the years as well. So great to see a lot of familiar names on the screen. Couple quick housekeeping things. So first of all, if you do have any questions, please just put them in the chat. And at the end, Sarah and Jenn will moderate those questions at the end and kind of go through them. I just also thought it'd be fun if you wanted to put in the chat as well, just to introduce yourself and say, like, who you are and what maybe part of the Bay you spend time on, if you happen to be from the Bay. So it'd be kind of good, just good to see kind of who's here. And then we'll get going with Jenn's presentation in just a second. So just a little bit about Jenn. So Jenn is really passionate about protecting the landscapes that make up Georgian Bay and what makes it so unique. Her work in land conservation, she partners with landowners, communities to safeguard habitat, support species at risk, and ensure these special places are protected for many generations to come. She brings a practical and collaborative approach to conservation and enjoys helping others discover how they can be part of the solution. So that's like kind of the formal part of the introduction. I can say I've had the privilege of working with Jenn for nearly a year now on some really cool projects. And in addition to being an expert, she's just a great, fun person to work with. So if you have a chance to work with her, I'd pick up the phone. Without any further ado, over to you, Jenn, and I will go off camera and see you all soon.
Okay, awesome. So thank you everybody so much for joining us this evening. And thank you, Andrew, for the great introduction. I feel very lucky and fortunate to be working with Georgian Bay Land Trust. I tell people all the time that I feel like I've landed my dream job. So I'm really happy to be here and to kind of share a bit about my contribution to the Land Trust and hopefully have a chance to work with all of you in some capacity at some point. So I'm really excited to be a part of the LandMark speaker series. And so tonight we're going to just talk a bit about some of the ways that you can protect your land for the long term while also exploring some of the really great financial and legacy benefits of conservation. So just I put together a brief agenda for everybody just so that we can kind of stay on track. So what I'd like to cover tonight is a brief overview of Georgian Bay Land Trust for those of you who may be new to our organization. So just a little bit about who we are and the work that we do. We're going to walk through different conservation options that are available to landowners, and that'll include conservation easements as well as land donations. And then we'll also introduce the Ecological Gifts Program, which offers really significant tax benefits for donors. And finally, we'll explain a little bit about what it's like to work with the Land Trust and some of the steps that are involved along the way. So I just want to start by acknowledging that Georgian Bay is really unique. And I think most of us can probably agree that Georgian Bay is a really special place. And it's special for a lot of different reasons to a lot of different people. But ultimately, it's a globally unique habitat, and it includes the largest collection of freshwater islands in the world and the highest diversity of reptiles in Canada. And for those reasons, and many others, it is designated as a UNESCO World Biosphere. Georgian Bay is a really globally significant landscape with unique ecosystems that really support a wide range of species, including many species that are at risk. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of increased development pressure in the region. So a lot of the land along Georgian Bay coastline is privately owned, which means that landowners like you play a really critical role in protecting these natural areas. And conservation really depends on those voluntary partnerships with those landowners to hopefully protect the bay in perpetuity. We feel really lucky to be able to work in this unique environment and have the opportunity to learn about connections to the land, and then also partner with other organizations and individuals who want to see Georgian Bay all remain a really special place that everybody can enjoy. So just a little overview of the Land Trust. So we are a charitable organization, and our purpose is to hold and conserve land for public benefit. And we do this through donations, through purchasing, and through registering conservation easements with individuals. Land trusts protect and steward environmentally, culturally, and historically significant lands. And I've put our mission up on the slide here, and I'll just read it for you. The Georgian Bay Land Trust acts to protect wilderness lands and species along the eastern shore of Georgian Bay and the North Channel and its near watershed. We do this through strategic conservation planning, land securement, stewardship, research, and education. The organization was founded in 1991 by volunteers when we received our first two land donations that were in the Point of Barrel region, and those reserves were established. Since then, we have expanded, and we now work throughout all of Eastern Georgian Bay. There's a map of our operating area there. So we stretch from the south in Port Severn all the way through the North Channel at the north end of our operating area. And so Sarah's put together this really wonderful infographic that I thought would be helpful to share, just shows some of the impact of our work. So since 1991, we have expanded to now protect 88 conservation properties, and these lands are home to 50 different species at risk. As an organization, we host several community events each year, including nature walks and fundraising events within various communities on the bay that all support our work. We also spearhead several research projects across our operating area, and they include avian research and wetland monitoring. And some of the work that we're doing with all of the work that we're doing on those projects is often with partners that are along the coast. So I would really encourage you, if you're not already, to like and follow all of our social media pages, because these are always updated with interesting events and information related to the conservation work that we're doing throughout the bay. Many of you may also be familiar with our corridor project, which is working with municipalities throughout Eastern Georgian Bay to establish conservation easement agreements on a whole network of road allowances to help establish a continuous corridor of protected lands along the coastline. Adam hosted a really wonderful speaker series webinar earlier this year discussing the corridor project. So if you have more interest in that, I would definitely encourage you to check it out if you're interested in learning more. Okay, so the big question is, what is a land trust? Many of you are probably familiar, but just for those of you who are not, a land trust is a nonprofit organization that works with landowners to protect natural areas. At Georgian Bay Land Trust, our focus is on conserving ecologically significant lands in the region and ensuring that they're protected in perpetuity. So we do work collaboratively with landowners. Everything that we do with landowners is voluntary, and we try to tailor all of the solutions to your goals as a landowner. So land trusts really do play an important role in conservation because they can help protect biodiversity, maintain ecosystem services, and provide space for recreation and connection to nature. At GBLT, we really try to leverage our land conservation mission by conducting all of these research projects within our protected areas that really helps further our conservation knowledge, and it helps us build a strategic plan for additional conservation work on the bay. So the research work that we're conducting is really directly feeding into our strategic securement strategy and helping direct our conservation focus as an organization. And I have to mention that our work is really made possible through partnerships with individuals, organizations, the First Nations communities, and all different levels of government. So we work with municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government. So I'm going to chat in a bit more detail about each of the securement options that GBLT can work with landowners to achieve. But just to kind of give an overview, one of the ways that we secure land is through a land purchase. And so some of you may be familiar with a recent purchase of a large parcel of undeveloped land that was in the Honey Harbor area. It was a 365-acre parcel of land that was put up for sale, and the project was really made possible with a combination of grant funding and partnerships and individual donations. And it really showed what can happen when groups of like-minded individuals come together for conservation. GBLT is really honored to be able to now steward this property in perpetuity. So when land purchase opportunities present themselves, we definitely take a look at them. But tonight, I really want to focus on the donations rather than the purchases. So we have fee simple donation, which is just a direct land donation. Conservation easement donations, which are agreements that are registered on title with a property, and they have a conservation vision and allow a landowner to maintain ownership of their property. Some of the other options for donations and conservation include bequests, so gifts of land that might come through an estate donation. And bargain sales is another option. So a property that might be sold below the market value that would help support conservation, or it could be a combination of a partial sale and a partial donation, which we would refer to as a split receipt process. So let's get into a few more of the details about each of these different options. So to start with fee simple, this is a land donation where the ownership of the property is transferred from the landowner directly to the land trust. In this situation, the title of the property is transferred from the donor to the land trust, and the land trust becomes the registered owner of the property. And with that, that means that all the responsibilities associated with the property become the land trust responsibility. And so that includes management of the property, monitoring of the property taxes, insurance, everything that goes along with being a landowner. Making a donation this way really ensures the permanent protection of the property, and it can be a really powerful way to leave a conservation legacy. Many donors also really appreciate the opportunity to be recognized for their donation, and there can be really great financial benefits as well, which I am going to get into. The other big option that I discuss with lots of different landowners is a conservation easement agreement. This is a legal agreement between yourself as the landowner and the land trust organization. In this situation, you continue to own your property, but certain types of development or activities are limited on the property in order to protect the ecological features that are present. So these agreements are really customized, so they reflect both the conservation values of the property and your needs as a landowner. So it's a really great option if you want to retain ownership while also ensuring long-term protection of the property. With this option, the responsibility to uphold the easement agreement is with the land trust to ensure that the property, the protection of the property is in perpetuity, and it's done in collaboration with the landowner. So part of that is that these easements are monitored annually with GBLT staff. These monitoring visits are coordinated with you ahead of time as the landowner. They're scheduled and can be really flexible. Some landowners want to be present and walk the property, and others don't. So it's really tailored to your needs and your wishes. But that's one of our requirements, is to do an annual monitoring visit of all of our conservation easement properties. And so with that, because you're still the owner of the property, that means that the management, the property taxes, the insurance, all of those things are still the responsibility of you, the landowner. These conservation easement agreements are registered on title, and they remain with the property even when the property changes hands. So if it's being passed down between family members, or if it's being sold on the open market, it doesn't matter. That easement agreement is registered on that property in perpetuity. So I just have a little example here to hopefully kind of explain the logistics and how an easement agreement works. I have a hypothetical property boundary up on the slide that you can take a look at. So in this situation, we have a property boundary. We can see in the western corner of the property there, it looks like there's some existing development on the property. And so in the easement agreement, we would designate two different areas of the property. So the first area would be what we would call the buildable area. And that's the area where typically you have all of your existing development. You might have a cottage or with like a deck and a dock and a bunkie and all that kind of stuff. And it's typically kind of in one concentrated area on the property. And then the rest of the property is oftentimes in a totally natural state. And a lot of times, because we're on Georgian Bay, there's a lot of ecologically sensitive habitat within that undeveloped section of the property. So we would call that where the cottage and your development is the building area, the buildable area, and then the remainder of the property is the protected area. And those two areas would be distinguished and discussed within the easement agreement. And oftentimes the covenants and the agreement will actually outline what is permitted in each of those areas. So oftentimes you're able to make improvements to existing structures and things like that within your buildable area. Whereas the protected area, we would have sort of the standard covenants that I've outlined on the screen here would apply to the remainder of the property. So some of those covenants that are pretty standard that go into most of our easements are things like no motor vehicles within the protected area, no dumping, no alteration of topography, no interference with the hydrology on the property, no invasive species introduction, no road construction, no vegetation removal, and certainly no severance of that portion of the property. And so really the greater the amount of protected area that can be designated within the easement agreement, the greater the tax benefits for the landowner. And so the tax benefits for an easement are a little bit different than a fee simple donation, and they really vary depending on the structure of the easement. Just a sort of a ballpark area, an idea is that the tax credit for the easement value is typically about 90 to 95% of the outright gift of the land. So hopefully that kind of gives a bit more of an overview of easements and fee simple donations. I just want to go in to talk about the Ecological Gifts Program. This it was a program that was created in 1995, and it's a federal program. And it allows donors of qualifying land or conservation easements to receive significant tax benefits. So the program is administered by the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change Canada. We call it ECCC. And it is designated really to encourage landowners to donate ecologically significant land by providing enhanced tax benefits. So one of the major advantages of the Ecological Gifts Program is the financial benefit. Landowners can receive a charitable tax receipt for the full fair market value of the donation, and the capital gains tax on the donated land can be eliminated. So this can make conservation not only environmentally meaningful, but also really financially viable. A charitable tax receipt for that full market value of the qualified land can be applied against an individual's net annual taxable income. And donors have a 10-year period to apply the receipt to their income tax payable. And so the benefits of the ecological gifts can really be significant when both the federal and provincial tax benefits are combined. And so just to note, I did mention that it has to be qualified land, and that means that the land has to be certified as ecologically sensitive. And that's where the Land Trust can certainly support you. So just a little bit more about that. So there is an eligibility requirement to participate in the Ecological Gifts Program, which GBLT would certainly support you by working with you through the entire process. The first requirement is for ECCC to approve the recipient to receive the gift. So GBLT would be the recipient. We are a qualified recipient, and we have been working with the EGP for several years. I believe since about 2007, and we have never had an application to the program denied. So we do work hard to build a really strong case for conservation of property within our operating area. And we collect sufficient data to really confidently outline the ecological sensitivity of a property as part of the application process. So the first step of the application process is to have ECCC certify the ecologically sensitive land. And this is done through an ecological sensitivity report, which is submitted to the Ecological Gifts Program along with a letter of intent from the donor. And that report is something typically that I would put together in conjunction with the landowner. And we would make that submission, that initial submission together. And then step two of the process with EcoGift is to obtain an appraisal. And that appraisal really determines the value of the land. These appraisals that are written are very detailed and very specific, a very specific report that really meets the requirements of the EcoGift program. And we are fortunate now to have a couple of different appraisers that we work with on this step of the process. So we can help with engaging them, providing them with details that they may need for their report. And in cases where properties are islands, then we can also help them get to those islands as well to collect their information. So once that appraisal is submitted, ECCC then has to certify the fair market value of that donation. And this is really based on the appraisal process that is reviewed by an appraisal review panel with the EcoGift program. And the panel reviews the appraisals and then they make a recommendation of the fair market value of the property to the minister. And this recommendation is then certified, and that is what we use for to issue a tax receipt to the donor. I know this seems like a lot of steps, but GBLT really coordinates with the donation with the EcoGift submissions and with the donor. And as part of being a qualified recipient, GBLT is responsible for the long-term management and conservation of the ecological gift and the ecologically sensitive features. So we do follow the Canadian Land Trust standards and practices and the Ecological Gifts Program policies. Their submissions and requirements are based on the Canadian Land Trust standards and practices. So we're very aligned with the program and have a really long-term history and track record of working together in a really positive way. So I know it sounds complex and that there's a lot of steps and intricacies, but I promised that I would work with you through the whole process and navigate each of the steps along the way. So if you're interested in potentially working with the Land Trust on a donation like this, I always recommend that the first step is probably to have an initial conversation, really to just explore your goals for conservation and figure out how we might be able to work together. So we can discuss different opportunities and what might work best for you. And then from there, if you'd like to move forward, I would probably request just some basic information about the property so that I can start to work on a little bit of a desktop review of the property to determine if there's any outstanding ecologically sensitive features that we can see even just from a desktop review, and the potential of the property fitting into the Ecological Gifts program. And then from there, we would probably schedule a site visit to come out and review the property and start to begin to collect some of the ecological data that we would need to start putting that eco-sensitivity report together. With all of that information from the desktop review and the site visit, I would start putting together what we call internally a case for conservation. And that document would be brought forward for review with our land securement committee. We do have a GBLT land securement strategy, and we review all of the opportunities for conservation against that strategy. So we try to fit all those properties that come to us within that strategy. Along with initial steps, we also are working with all of our local First Nations on each of the securement projects, and we are working on engaging them really early in the process. So having these conversations about potential conservation opportunities pretty early on in our process and looking for input and feedback. We're always looking for different funding opportunities to be able to support some of these land securement projects. And so we can kind of discuss those opportunities as they come up and as they may fit into certain funding opportunities as well. So there are costs that are associated with working on a land donation. And so if we can tap into some of those grant opportunities, we certainly take opportunities when they are presented to us. Ultimately, it is our board of directors that has the final opportunity for approval of a securement project. But I try to do all of that background work ahead of time and make a really solid recommendation about a project before we move forward with it. So really my goal is to try to make the process as clear and supportive as possible. So going back to the eco-gift program a little bit, in terms of assessing for ecological sensitivity of a property, the eco-gift program is really rooted in preservation of Canada's environmental heritage. And it really is the heart of the EGP program. So some of their criteria that they have that a property needs to meet are certainly having either species at risk or species at risk habitat present on the property. They look for provincially significant wetlands, so PSWs, or areas of natural and scientific interest, which is an ANSI, or any other areas of interest. And oftentimes, that's part of our desktop review. We can kind of determine that without even stepping foot on the property. Same with the zoning designations. So if your property already has an environmental designation, like an EP or an NSI or even a fish habitat designation, that is of interest to EcoGift, and it's something that they look at as part of their applications. Um, Certainly looking at ecological functions of the property. If we know that there is specific habitat there that is special, that is something that is noted. And also connectivity. So just looking at connecting existing natural areas along the bay. So those are sort of the EGP criteria. And not surprisingly, a lot of the GBLT criteria align with the EcoGift criteria. And certainly connectivity is important to us. So we're looking to expand linkages between existing protected properties with like partner protected lands, First Nations, provincial parks and conservation reserves, and also national parks. We also are looking at species at risk and their habitat. We're looking for areas that are supporting provincially and federally listed species using the SARA, SARO, and COSEWIC designations. And provincially ranked species, so S1 to S3 species and ecosystems, are also prioritized in the criteria that we're looking to satisfy. And same with EcoGift, we're looking for provincially significant features like PSWs and ANSIs, and certainly areas with ecosystem and landscape value. So areas with high ecological integrity or climate resilience. Property size may play a factor into the decision, but it will always be balanced against the ecological importance of the property. So consideration will be given to properties that would meet the EcoGift criteria as well as the GBLT criteria. And I've also included CLTIP here, which is the Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program. This is a key component for us to review to ensure that we can apply to have each property participate in that program, because it does allow us as an organization to be tax exempt, which is important when you're taking on a property in perpetuity. Okay, some of the other details that I wanted to just cover. So um, I always tell everybody right off the start, I am not a tax expert. So I'm always going to recommend that before you move forward with a donation scenario, you really need to consult with your personal accountant, your financial planner, any kind of financial expert to receive the advice that's really specific to you. So we are not lawyers. I am not an accountant, and I'm not qualified to be providing individual tax advice. I can tell you all about how the Eco Gift program works, but how it's applied to your individual financial situation is a whole other story. So I just want to be really clear about that. Uh, so some of the other steps that are in the process, once a property can be deemed ecologically sensitive, there's other steps and things to consider. So one of the things that we'll look for at the beginning of the process would be a signature on a letter of intent. And this is really, it's not a legally binding letter, but it does show that there's a willingness from the landowner to move forward with the project. And it is required as that first submission to the Ecological Gifts Program with the eco sensitivity report. Sometimes we need to get a survey done for the property. Lots of properties already have that, and if you already have it, then that's great. But we will sometimes need a survey or a boundary confirmation along the way. I've already mentioned an appraisal is part of the process. So we need to understand what the value of the land is. And we can certainly support with the appraisal process. The appraiser needs to be an Appraisal Institute of Canada compliant appraiser. And the reports for the EGP are very specific and related to land value. So it's a different type of report than sort of a general 2-page appraisal. These reports are sometimes close to 100 pages long. So there's lots of detailed information in there. Lawyers are also involved throughout the process, but mostly at the end when the land transfer is being complete or when the easement is being registered on title with the property. And at that time, there are legal fees that are on both sides of that transaction. And something that we haven't talked about yet is the stewardship planning piece. So that's something that I like to talk about in the initial stages of a potential donation to just sort of figure out what financial resources we might have available to support the long-term property monitoring and management. When we're taking on a property like that, we have to be thinking really long term. These easement agreements are registered for like 999 years, and fee simple donations are owned by the land trust forever. So we really need to be thinking long term and the big picture. And so finding out what kind of resources we have to be able to put into protecting that property is an important part of the conversation. GBLT does have a stewardship endowment fund for ongoing management of all secured lands. And so we are always looking to kind of build that up to be able to ensure that we can protect these properties forever. Another question that I get a lot is how long can this take? So the process can be really quick or it can be more lengthy. Really, each project is really unique. We have completed projects within like a 3-4 month time period, and other projects can take years to complete. So it's hard to give a direct answer to that question, but just something to consider when you're like thinking about a timeline. So a little bit more about the property stewardship piece. So once a property is protected for the land trust, stewardship really becomes a key focus. The land trust does monitor a property over time to ensure that those ecological values are maintained. That is our responsibility, both as a land trust under the Canadian Land Trust Standards and Practices and to the Ecological Gifts Program when we accept a gift. For fee simple properties, we are committed to monitoring these at least once every year. Often they're visited multiple times each year, but this work is often done by volunteer property stewards, which we are very grateful for and wouldn't be able to accomplish all that we do without them. So thank you, land stewards. For conservation easements, I've already mentioned that these are monitored annually and that those are done in consultation with a GBLT staff member. These visits are arranged ahead of time, and in following with the Canadian Land Trust standards and practices, monitoring reports for all of these visits are generated for each visit, and we keep them on file with the property. Part of that is so that we can show that we're doing our due diligence, but also we do monitor ecological changes over time. We know that the landscape is going to change in a natural way, and so it's helpful for us to kind of see how things are evolving and changing on the properties that we have the opportunity to steward. We thankfully have a software system that helps us track and monitor all of our management issues on properties. And these can be, simple things like garbage wash-ups on an island property. It could be invasive species growth within a property. In some cases, there's encroachments on properties. All of these are things that we are looking at when we are doing those monitoring visits. And so we can keep track of all of that in our software system, which is really helpful. But this is really just about long-term care. So making sure that the conservation vision for the property is upheld forever. This is GBLT's responsibility when we accept a property for donation or when we enter into a conservation easement agreement. And we do take that job really seriously. It's a big deal and it really matters to us. So just kind of thinking about, after hearing all of this, do you think that this is right for you? Some landowners take a lot of time to kind of mull these things over and think about if this is a right fit for them. And others know immediately that this is what I want to do and let's start working on it. So there is no right way, but just some additional kind of ideas and things to think about. As you're considering potentially like a potential land donation scenario for your property. Conservation might be a really good fit if you care about protecting the natural features of your land and you're also thinking about long-term stewardship of the property. It's worth exploring if you are interested in leaving a legacy or also just taking advantage of the available tax incentives. Some landowners wish to protect the natural features before they pass it on to the next generation, and others just see conservation as a way to resolve property or potential income tax challenges. So, other motivations might include ensuring privacy from your neighbors or sorting out future use of a property that's currently shared by several members of an expanding family. Conservation of your property can occur by transferring ownership and or retaining ownership of the property. And we've talked about the different options and responsibilities and implications for each of those various options. For all properties, there are certain steps that GBLT has to follow. And by considering each of these steps, we can really ensure that the activities are following those Canadian Land Trust standards and practices, and that they're also ensuring that the property really fits into the mission of our organization, and certainly that we are capable of adequately stewarding the property going forward. So we're really happy to work with you to explore the options and determine what will provide your property with the most sound conservation package and provide you with the best financial arrangement for your unique situation. Um, every property is different and every situation is different. So it's really important that we just start with a conversation to understand each other's goals. I've also just included some of the most common questions that we do here. The first one is, can I still use my land? If I donate it to the land trust, can I still use it? In many cases, yes. Certainly with a conservation easement agreement, you are the landowner. You are certainly entitled to continue to use your land. For fee simple donations that come to the land trust, a common question is, will it be open to the public? Are people going to be using this property? And so for all of our fee simple donations that are received, we classify those properties into three different areas. So we call them red, yellow, or green, and that determines the level of access And that level of access is really determined based on the ecological sensitivity of the property. So if you look on our website, you can see under the conservation properties, they're designated in those three different categories. Red being there is no access to the property, which means that it has high ecological sensitivity, and we don't want people there potentially disturbing the habitats that are there. Yellow means that you can have access with permission. So we're just looking to have you touch base with us before you go out and use those properties. And green is totally open to the public, and you're welcome to go and visit at any time. So each of those are outlined on our website. And when we protect a new property, we always add those in, and we have to review what is the ecological sensitivity of the property and what would be the potential impacts to that property based on public use. So certainly conservation easements are not open to the public, and they're not advertised on our website either unless it's authorized by the owner. So you would have an opportunity to share if you want to have the location of your property visible or not, and have certain details that are about that property available to the public or not. So that's totally your decision as a landowner. Another good question is, do I need to pay property taxes? In a fee simple donation scenario, no, that responsibility now sits with the land trust. If you have a conservation easement agreement, then yes, the property taxes are still your responsibility. With a conservation easement agreement, you do have the opportunity, once you have that easement registered on title, to apply for a rezoning through your local municipality to have your property rezoned to like an environmental protection designation. And once you have that designation, it should reduce your municipal taxes, but that's certainly something to talk about with your individual local municipality. We did talk a little bit about how long is the process. In my experience, it can really vary depending on the property. It depends on sort of the timing of the inquiry and also just the motivation of the donor. So if you are really interested now and you think, I really want to donate my property and I want the whole thing to be complete by the end of 2026, this is a really great time of year because we're just getting into the start of our field season. If we ever lose all of our snow and we can get our boats into the water, we can start to collect some of that ecological data and start doing some of those initial site visits to review properties, and sort of start to work through that ecological gifts program process. And we would have a really good potential opportunity to complete that project within this year. If you were to want to start that process in November and hope it to be completed by December, it probably won't be possible because we do need to create that case for conservation. We need to have that ecological data and information to be able to make that case. So this is a really great time of year if you're starting to think about a potential donation scenario. And I've already also talked about what are the costs. So certainly there are legal costs, there are appraisal costs. Sometimes we have survey costs, individual accounting advice. Those are sort of some of the things to start thinking about. I also did mention that we do try to take advantage of any grant opportunities that are presented to help cover some of those costs. But those are all things to just be aware of and to think about, that there is a cost for conservation, and hopefully the land trust can be supportive of covering some, if not all, of those costs that are associated with a property donation. So I'm always really happy to walk through all of these questions and more in detail. Again, it's really helpful to kind of have that initial conversation to talk about your unique and individual situation and how we could potentially work together. So I think that's all I have. So I'm really happy to answer, or at least try to answer, any questions that you might have. And yeah, thank you again for joining and for your interest in a Wednesday evening learning about land conservation. I could talk about it forever, but you're probably getting tired of hearing my voice. So I'll pass it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Jen. Great presentation. Yeah, so if anyone has questions for Jen, please type them in the chat now. We've already got a few that came in during the presentation. So the first one is about how US taxpayers can donate property.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually recently worked with an American family who made a donation, and we worked with the American Friends for Canadian Conservation. It was a successful project. But there's a lot of other sort of additional steps that go along with that. So, really happy to have a conversation about that process. There are different steps involved, and in some cases, we would also work with the Ecological Gifts Program. But again, it kind of depends on your unique situation and where you need those tax benefits to lie. So, it's certainly possible, but again, it can be really individual, and I'm really happy to talk about that if we wanted to go into more detail on a call.
Okay, great. So I think Beth asked this question before you went over it in your facts, but maybe if there's just anything more you want to say about it. So she says, aside from the initial tax benefit from a charitable donation, should having a conservation easement on a property reduce the assessed value for annual property tax purposes? And if so, does the GBLT inform the local municipality or MPAC of the registered easement, or is it left to the property owner to file a request for reconsideration?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That request for reconsideration has to come from the landowner. So again, I'm happy to support that process and provide some guidance because I have gone through it before for the GBLT properties, but with a conservation easement, because you remain the landowner, you do have to kind of drive that process on your own and file those requests individually for yourself. So hopefully that helps answer that.
Mhm. Um, so Brian's wondering what the costs are that a landowner has to cover.
Yeah, that's a great question too. And again, we're just sort of starting to find out what some of the grant funding opportunities might be to help with some of these property securement projects that we're looking at for this year and moving forward. So certainly, if the land trust can secure some of that grant funding to help cover some of those costs, we do. We have been very successful in a lot of those grants that do support our work in the past. So, those costs like the appraisal costs and the legal costs and things like that, we can sometimes get covered. But ultimately, again, that's sort of a question that we can have in the beginning to find out, what resources do you have available? What resources does the land trust have available? And how can we work together to make these projects kind of come together? So I know that's not a super direct answer, but yeah, we have in the past relied a lot on a lot of the funding opportunities that are available to help cover a lot of those securement costs, and we're hoping to be able to continue to do that moving forward.
Awesome, thanks, Jen. Second question from Brian here. What happens if property is registered under the forest management program? Does that still stay in place and do the property tax benefits continue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is something that we always make note of within that first ecological sensitivity report that goes to the EcoGift program. So with a MIF in place, it already is sort of a checkbox for the EcoGift program. Once that property, so there's sort of two different situations. If you're looking for a fee simple donation, then that MIF tip sort of doesn't become relevant anymore on the property because the whole thing is being protected for conservation for ecological purposes. That MIF tip sort of just expires, and we work to enroll the program into the Conservation Land Tax Incentive Program, which allows the land trust to have 100% tax reduction. If you are putting an easement on the property with the MIF tip, there really is no impact. You can continue to participate in that MIF tip program. and continue to renew it as you see fit. But there really isn't any impact to having a MIF tip with a conservation easement at the same time.
Okay. Sherry's wondering if existing roads through the property automatically discount it for conservation.
Yeah, that's a good question too. I'm going to say no. Existing features on the property are something that we just take into consideration when we're doing that initial review. So that's why part of that desktop assessment is really important to kind of understand what are the existing features, both natural and developed, that are currently there on the property. And we can sort of work through that. There are large sections of property that people own that might have just, like a simple cottage road through to access like a shoreline lot or something. And that wouldn't discount it for conservation at all. It's just something to consider and to document at the beginning of the process.
Okay, awesome. Beth, I think Beth has additional questions about the rezoning. I think that's something that we can have a separate conversation about because it's kind of a more of a technical issue. So, Beth, we can reach out to you afterwards about that. Another question from Janet. How big does the property need to be for conservation consideration? And what proportion of the property needs to be buildable versus not buildable?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So, a lot of different land trusts have sort of just like a general size requirement of what they would be willing to consider taking on. We've really struggled with putting a size, like a number requirement on that because it's very possible that a very tiny property could have high ecological sensitivity. And in that case, um, we want to protect it. And so we don't limit ourselves to a certain size of the property. And then in terms of the conservation easement, for where you're talking about, what proportion is buildable versus protected area, there isn't really a hard number for that either. So that's part of the whole conversation of tailoring that agreement to your needs. Some landowners, they have an existing cottage and, a small area that's developed, but maybe they have future plans for a bunkie or, putting an addition on their cottage or something else. And so all of that can kind of be worked into tailoring, like a tailored easement agreement that works for you and for the property. In my experience, typically the tighter the buildable envelope is, so that the smaller that area is, the higher the tax benefit because the more property that you're putting into that protected zone, the higher the tax benefits. So there are no rules really from our standpoint around that. It's really what's going to work for you, how we can tailor that agreement to work. And also consider the ecological sensitivity. So part of that initial site visit that we do is to review those areas of the property that we would think have that high conservation value. And we would certainly encourage you to put those areas into the protected area of the property. But again, it's all sort of tailored and part of the discussion and how we would be working together.
All right, thanks, Jen. It looks like that's all of our questions, unless there's any coming in here at the last minute. So I think with that, thank you everybody for the amazing questions. This has been a really good Q&A. Thank you again, Jen. And I'm going to hand it over to Janet for some final remarks.
Jen, thank you very much. That was lots of great detail, and I'm sure all of our attendees found it very interesting. It's nice to see a few familiar faces out there. So as Jen said, spring will not be here anytime soon, but we look forward to seeing you all in the Bay. Just to let you know, Jen's video will be posted on our website shortly. And next in the series is Mosses on Georgian Bay with Karen Corneef. And this presentation will take a closer look at how sphagnum moss works, its biology and medicinal properties, and the crucial role it plays in nature. So again, you can just register for this final LandMark event at gblt.org/events. And just want to say that we're always so grateful for all of your continued commitment to conservation. supporting our work on the Bay, and for your tireless support in making sure these pristine wilderness lands remain intact for decades to come. We hope that we can count on your support again this year. It's easy. You just visit gblt.org/donate. So thanks again for coming, everybody. I hope you've all had a lovely winter. Spring is coming soon, we hope. Thanks, everyone, and have a lovely night.